Hello and welcome to Hitchcock in the 40s. I'm Bill Myers, and this presentation will take a look at the films of Alfred Hitchcock that he directed in the 1940s. Here's a quick bio. Alfred Hitchcock was born outside London on August 13, 1899. His father was a grocer. One hobby Hitchcock had was keeping tabs on the British merchant fleet via Lloyd's Bulletin and a map on his wall. A story he told his entire life involved him at age 5 or so being given a note by his father to take to the sheriff. The sheriff read the note, immediately put him into a jail cell, locked the door, and said, "This is what happens to bad boys." He was let out after a short time, and the main lesson for him was a lifelong great fear of police. This would often show up in his movies, where the police were incompetent at best. In college, he studied engineering, but gave up college to financially help his family. He got a job doing advertising layouts, then got a job at a movie studio called Famous Players Lasky, where he made title cards for silent movies. In 1923, he got his first credit as an art director on Woman to Woman. He started directing Number 13, but didn't finish. He then became an assistant director. He directed his first completed movie in 1925 in Germany. It was The Pleasure Garden and received good reviews. In 1926, he directed his first suspense film, The Lodger, a movie about a man thought to be Jack the Ripper. It was a hit and is considered to be the first Hitchcock movie. Also in 1926, he married Alma Reville, who worked at the same studio as Hitchcock. She was an extremely important part of his professional and personal life until his death. He also directed the first sound movie in Great Britain, Blackmail. Starting with The Man Who Knew Too Much in 1934, he directed highly praised and box office hits such as The 39 Steps and The Lady Vanishes. With these, he became known in America, where he wanted to go because of the much better shooting facilities in Hollywood. While shooting The Lady Vanishes, he was contacted by Uber producer David O. Selznick. Hitchcock came to America and met with him in 1937. He agreed to make a movie about the Titanic and signed a contract for 4 movies. Hitchcock was quite disappointed over his contract, which was $50,000, today's dollars almost $1 million, which was far less than what other directors were receiving. He was starred in 1939, so he went back to England and made Jamaica Inn, one of his lesser efforts. Although it was a hit in Great Britain and America, it was based on a book by Daphne du Maurier, who did not like the film version of her book. Why Hitchcock signed on with Selznick is not anything I could figure out. They both very much wanted to be in control of their film projects. They were both detail-oriented. Hitchcock liked to have everything prepared before he started on a picture, and Selznick would write multi-page memos to directors ordering them to make changes as they were shooting a movie. This was bound to cause some conflicts. When Hitchcock got to America, Selznick had changed his mind about the Titanic project and presented Hitchcock with Daphne du Maurier's best-selling Rebecca as his first project. Hitchcock had wanted to buy the rights to that book while in England but couldn't afford it, so he was happy to take this on. In late 1938, early 1939, Selznick was totally wrapped up in Gone with the Wind and couldn't pay any mind to Rebecca. Hitchcock had Philip MacDonald and Michael Hogan work on the script. Casting started while the script was being finished. Hitchcock preferred Robert Donat, but his studio would not loan him out for the production. Selznick was looking at Walter Pidgeon, Leslie Howard, Melvyn Douglas, and William Powell. Hitchcock was a bit tempted only by William Powell. They finally settled on Laurence Olivier. Selznick was happy with this because he could keep his lover Vivien Leigh happy while she went through the Gone with the Wind post-production. So then Vivien Leigh became the leading candidate to play the unnamed heroine of Rebecca until her disastrous screen test. Here's part of it. The audio is kind of low and I boosted it as much as I can.
Well, find out who broke it and make them be more careful. Damn it. Why do they come to me with these things? That's your job.
Darling, I meant to tell you, but I didn't. I broke the Cupid myself. I'm sorry. It was terribly careless on me.
You did? Well, why didn't you say something about it when Frith was here?
I started to, but somehow I didn't get a chance.
Does doesn't matter. We'll have to explain to Mrs. Danvers that's what I've called.
Oh, no, no. Please, Maxim, will you sit down and let me go upstairs?
Mrs. Danvers is very... Mrs. Danvers is very...
Hitchcock wanted Nova Pilbeam, who he had worked with on a couple of movies in Great Britain, but Selznick refused mainly because she was too unknown. So auditions dragged on through May and June of 1939. A lot of actresses were tested. Selznick was much more concerned over this than Hitchcock, who just wanted to get it over with. Selznick knew the publicity value of multiple screen tests, which he had done with Gone with the Wind. Then Selznick met Joan Fontaine at a dinner party. She said she had just finished reading an excellent book, Rebecca. That perked Selznick's interest, and he invited her to test for the role. She didn't have a lot of experience, but her older sister, Olivia de Havilland, did, and Selznick knew her. He ended up in love with Fontaine, but he and Hitchcock both dithered over the casting, even after a successful screen test. And here's part of it.
Well, find out. Make it a bit more careful. Damn it, I don't see why they came to me with this. That's your job.
Oh, darling, I was going to tell you, but I didn't get the chance. I'm the Johnny Cupid.
Well, why didn't you say so?
Well, I wanted to. I started to, but I didn't get the chance.
It doesn't matter, but you'll have to explain to Mrs. Danvers. I'll call her.
Oh, no, Maxim, you tell her. I'll go upstairs.
Nonsense. Anyone would think you were afraid of her.
Well, I'm not exactly afraid of her. I don't really know how to explain.
You do such extraordinary things, such as calling on the bishop's wife and sitting on the edge of your chair and saying yes and no like somebody after a new job.
I can't help being shy. Too many people looking me up and down like a prize cow.
Who looks you up and down?
Everybody.
Well, what does it matter if they do? It gives them some interest in life.
Oh, why should I be the one to provide the interest and take all the criticism?
Because life at Manderley is the only thing that interests anybody down here.
Slap in the eye I must have been to them then. I suppose that's why you married me. Because I was dull and quiet and inexperienced, and no one could ever gossip about me.
So you can see how different that audition was from Vivian Lee's.
Well,
While this was going on, Hitchcock in early June turned over his lengthy treatment of Rebecca. To say Selznick was shocked by it is an understatement. Hitchcock treated books as kind of like a sketch pad with the basics there. He felt he could do whatever he wanted to do with it. Selznick was making a movie from a beloved bestseller, and the movie was going to be faithful to the book. He also didn't like the humor Hitch had added in. The script was finally finished to Selznick's satisfaction, and shooting started in the summer of 1939. Hitchcock embraced the hiring of Fontaine and worked closely with her. Olivia was upset that Lee had not gotten the role and was pretty cold to Fontaine during the shooting. The shoot lasted 63 days, and then Selznick took over the editing. Even though Selznick wanted to stick close to the book, the ending had to be changed to be in compliance with the production code. There's a light spoiler here. The code would not let a murderer get away with it. So the movie's ending is quite different than the book, but evidently movie audiences understood and no one seemed upset by it. Something else that Hitchcock toyed with here and in subsequent films was adding a very subtle gay element. The question was whether Mrs. Danvers, played by Judith Anderson, was in love with Rebecca. Here's a scene that makes the case subtly that she probably was.
Do you wish anything, madam?
I didn't expect to see you, Mrs. Danvers. I noticed that the window wasn't closed, and I came up to see if I could fasten it.
Why did you say that? I closed it before I left the room. You opened it yourself, didn't you? You've always wanted to see this room, haven't you, madam? Why did you never ask me to show it to you? I was ready to show it to you every day. It's a lovely room, isn't it? Loveliest room you've ever seen. Everything is kept just as Mrs. De Winter liked it. Nothing has been altered since that last night. Come, I'll show you her dressing room. This is where I keep all her clothes. You'd like to see them, wouldn't you? Feel this. It was a Christmas present from Mr. De Winter. He was always giving her expensive gifts the whole year round. I keep her underwear on this side. They were made specially for her by the nuns in the convent of St. Clair. I always used to wait up for her, no matter how late. Sometimes she and Mr. De Winter didn't come home until dawn. While she was undressing, she'd tell me about the party she'd been to. She knew everyone that mattered. Everyone loved her. When she'd finished her bath, she'd go into the bedroom, go over to the dressing table. Oh, you've moved her brush, haven't you? There, that's better. Just as she always laid it down. Come on, Danny. Hair drill, she would say. I'd stand behind her like this. Brush away 20 minutes at a time. And then she would say, good night, Danny. Step into her bed. I embroidered this case for her myself, and I keep it here always. Did you ever see anything so delicate? Look, you can see my hand.
So here's the trailer for Rebecca.
Announcing the return of the most glamorous motion picture ever made, David O. Selznick and Alfred Hitchcock bring you the Grand Slam prize winner that made motion picture history. Winner of the Academy Award, voted by America's critics as the best picture of the year. And now, as a result of a national poll, winning new honors as audiences throughout the country vote to see it again. The Selznick Studio's successor to Gone with the Wind, Rebecca, brought to the screen with all the warmth and emotion that made millions of readers acclaim Daphne du Maurier's bestseller as the most exciting love story of our time. The fascinating Max de Winter lives on the screen in the person of Laurence Olivier.
Why, it's Max de Winter.
How do you do?
The shy, unsophisticated young girl who dared to follow in the footsteps of the beautiful Rebecca is portrayed by lovely Joan Fontaine.
How could I ask you to love me when I knew you loved Rebecca still? Whenever you touched me, I knew you were comparing me with Rebecca.
What is the mystery of Rebecca? What dread secret is hidden within the silent walls of Manderley?
It's not only in this room. It's in all the rooms in the house. You can almost hear it now. Do you think the dead come back and watch the living?
Tell me, is Mrs. Van Hopper a friend of yours or just a relation?
No, she's my employer. I'm what is known as a paid companion.
I didn't know companionship could be bought.
There is mystery, love, and laughter in Rebecca, the motion picture still unsurpassed for suspenseful romance.
The movie turned out very well. It was a hit with audiences and was nominated for 11 Oscars and won 2, Best Cinematography and Best Picture, the only movie Hitchcock directed to do so. But the Oscar went to Selznick, who had produced it. Hitchcock received his first of 5 Best Director nominations. Hitchcock was supposed to make 2 movies a year for Selznick, but knew even before starting Rebecca that Selznick had nothing in the hopper for a next movie. It was very common for those under contract to be loaned out to other studios or producers for a hefty fee, of course, and Hitchcock was able to be loaned to producer Walter Wanger, who had a project, Personal History, that he wanted to make into a film. It was about a foreign correspondent in the 1920s. He had commissioned some scripts, but he wasn't happy with it, so he offered it to Hitchcock. This was just what Hitch wanted, to be able to craft a script to his satisfaction. What he and the script writers came up with was Foreign Correspondent. With the highest budget Hitchcock had ever worked with, $1.5 million, about $30 million today, he had all the studio toys he could hope for. He built huge sets of the interior of a windmill, parts of Amsterdam and London, and an airplane. Here's the trailer.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Johnny Jones of the Globe Syndicate speaking to you from Amsterdam, Holland, where I've been an eyewitness to the assassination of the Dutch cabinet minister Van Meer, the key figure of European politics. An hour ago, I arrived from London by plane to meet Van Meer. As I waited for him on the steps of the Peace Palace, he alighted from his car and made his way toward me. Halfway, he was stopped by a news photographer who asked for a picture. Van Meer consented and was shot dead by a revolver held close to the photographer's camera. Bystanders rushed to Van Meer's aid, and I pursued the assassin through the crowd, only to lose him in traffic. Follow that car, quick! Say, you better get out of here. This might be dangerous.
You'll be silly, drive on.
Trouble, who's he shot? Van Meer, assassinated. Did? Looks like it. Here. There you are, my boy. Oh!
I'm afraid you'll have to keep the girl there much longer than we planned.
But that's absolutely impossible.
I think you better keep the girl there for the rest of the night.
Well, I can't very well explain, but I simply couldn't pull a thing like that. If you knew how much I loved you, you'd faint. There. Now, what'd I tell you?
Joel McRae, Lorraine Day, Herbert Marshall, George Sanders, Albert Basserman, Robert Benjamin.
Hitchcock had wanted Gary Cooper and Barbara Stanwyck for the leads, but they turned them down. Casting was something he often had trouble with. A list of stars turned their noses down at thrillers, so Hitchcock often couldn't get who he really wanted for leads. Cooper did later tell him that he had made a mistake in which he had signed on to do the movie. He ended up with Joel McRae and Lorraine Day, seen here with Rebecca alum George Sanders. The leads did a fine job, but did not have the box office clout bigger stars would have had. Foreign Correspondent is full of great Hitchcock touches, like the assassination scene.
Mr. Van Meer, how are you? We somehow seemed to lose each other the day before yesterday. I'm so sorry you were called away. Well, don't you remember me? We shared the same cab together on the way to the luncheon.
Excuse me. May I have your picture, Mr. Van Meer? Thank you.
There he goes!
Hitchcock had the extras hold 2 umbrellas for those shots, so it looked like there were more people there than there really were. Another famous touch is the one windmill spinning in the opposite direction of the others. This is a good example of what's called a matte shot, whereas the bottom of the screen is real life and the top part from about the windmills up are actually paintings, and they put the windmill blades, stuck it through the painting and had them spin.
You don't suppose they could have got up that high, do you?
It's a very entertaining story of intrigue in Europe just before the start of World War II, and it has a basic Hitchcock theme of a regular guy getting all caught up in danger and romance. It's climaxed with a really well done airplane crash. On the right is a mistake that was left in. The camera accidentally tilted up to show the top of the set. It's such an exciting scene that it's not very noticeable. Hitch loved a technical challenge, and you had one here. Here's a shot of the plane crashing.
Away from that door! We're crazy to stay here. When she hits the water, the tail's going to be the best place. All right, come on, let's get back there. Come on.
So this is how it was done. The great stunt pilot Paul Manteve stuck a camera on top of his plane and dove towards the Pacific Ocean, pulling up at the very last minute. That footage was then projected onto a very thin screen, and was a technique called rear projection, which was used a lot back in those days. And there were 2 tanks full of water on either side of the projector, and at the exact moment, the tanks were released and burst through the screen, and we get a really good effect there. Anytime you have water in a studio, it's very complicated, and Hitch did a great job with this scene. There were a lot of complications with the Hitchcock contract with Selznick. Wanger wanted to make another movie with him, but Selznick refused. Hitchcock was trying to get a sequel to the 39 Steps going, but nothing came of that. He'd managed to get loaned out to RKO for a couple of movies. There was also a book that RKO had, which he was interested in before the fact, about a charming cad planning to murder his newlywed wife for her money. But what he ended up doing was maybe the most unusual movie he directed, a screwball comedy. Hitchcock was friends with Carole Lombard, and she really wanted to work with him. She had a script in hand about a sophisticated couple who discover their marriage is void after some technical mishap, and screwball comedy ensues. When Hitchcock saw the script, he realized he didn't really understand the characters and pretty much just shot the script. Normally, he was very involved with script writing, but made an exception here. Cary Grant was supposed to play the lead, but dropped out. RKO had Robert Montgomery under contract, so he got the role. Here's a clip.
Glasses.
Don't want to drink out of the bottle, do you? Get going, Annie. Keep twirling it, honey.
You were never going to tell me.
I was going to tell you, Annie. I was going to tell you later.
Later? How much later could you have told me?
Now, there's no need in going on like
You were
this.
going to wait until...
Annie.
And then throw me aside like a squeezed lemon.
Squeeze lemon. Don't dramatize this.
I've given you the best years of my life, and you were willing to go on and on. I've always had a suspicion about you. So did my mother. Your forehead slants back too much.
Will you please let me say...
Don't touch me.
But, Annie, I...
Get out of here. Go on. You're not staying here.
We can't leave the bedroom until after we've made up.
You're not in the bedroom. Get out.
Annie, listen to me.
I know you for what you are. I'm lucky I found you out. You're going out of here.
Those are my clothes.
Never come back. I never want to see you again as long as I live.
Yeah, what are you doing?
Lombard actually directed the Hitchcock cameo scene, and as a joke, she made him do many takes of it. They got along very well, and the movie was a success. Here's the odd trailer. Note whose name is not mentioned in it.
You'll see Carole Lombard and Robert Montgomery together for the first time. You'll see one of the funniest comedy situations that ever hit the screen. You'll see what happens when Mr. and Mrs. Smith discover that they were never legally married.
Still with RKO, Hitchcock decided to make a movie of this book. It's the story of a woman who marries a man and slowly comes to realize he wants to murder her, and does. But the Hollywood production code would not allow the lead to get away with murder, so some things needed to be changed. And change it did. It turned into Suspicion with an exclamation point. This is a good example of how Hitchcock took the basics of a book and had no trouble changing it to suit his purposes. In the movie, the wife discovers her husband is a bit of a cad and suspects him of plotting her murder. In the book, there was lots of philandering by both leads, which would never do for the movie. Another problem here was that the husband was played by Cary Grant, and RKO would not allow him to be a killer. It ends up being a psychological thriller of love and paranoia. On sets, Cary Grant was very insecure and could be quite needy. He did not like co-star Joan Fontaine at all and felt that Hitchcock was giving her too much attention. He also felt snubbed when she was nominated for an Oscar and he wasn't. On top of that, she won. This is the only Hitchcock movie where an actor or actress won an acting Oscar. Grant decided he didn't really want to work with Hitchcock again. We'll soon see how that went. Here's the trailer.
There was something strange about Johnny Aysgarth. I knew it long before I married him. Anything you could put your finger on, and yet you were always conscious of it. Conscious of something vague, restless, frightening. It was our first meeting on the hilltop.
Now, what did you think I'd do? Kill you? Nothing less than murder can justify such a violent self-defense.
It's so easy to think. I knew Johnny loved me as desperately as I loved him. And yet I remember now that even his reassurances seemed almost sinister.
I want nothing but to spend the rest of my life with you. And if you were to die first,
If I were to die first. From that moment on, my life was filled with fear. Not of Johnny, I loved him too much to really be afraid. But the fear of not knowing, the agony of waiting, of wondering how it would happen, of waking in the middle of the night, shaking with terror, and finding myself praying that whatever it was, it would be done quickly and with mercy. These are the facts, the evidence before the crime. I wanted you to know, in case I met a violent end.
Here's probably the most famous scene from the movie, the glass of milk that has a light put inside of it to make sure we're looking at it.
Good night, Lena.
Hitchcock also would have preferred the original title Before the Fact, but the movie was so different from the book that it made no sense. RKO came up with Suspicion, which Hitchcock never liked. The movie, though, was a big hit and critically acclaimed. In addition to Best Actress, it was nominated for Best Picture and Music Score. Hitchcock really wanted to remake his The Lodger as his next movie for Selznick, but Selznick was never that interested in the project. So he got with Universal Studios producer Jack Skirball and talked about a version of the 39 Steps about an ordinary American on the run for a crime he didn't commit. This would be his first original movie not based on a book. The movie ended up being Saboteur. The hero is wrongly accused of sabotage and must prove his innocence on his own. Here's the trailer.
I'm Barry Kane, American. Right now, I'm a fugitive. A couple of days ago, I was an aircraft worker. Then something happened. My best friend died in that fire. The authorities questioned everybody. I told them what I knew.
There were 2 detectives here a moment ago. They wanted to arrest you. They said that you killed him.
You don't know what it is to be hunted like an animal. To dread every door you open. To fear everybody. Even the one girl you could love.
Even if a man committed murder to defend himself, maybe I wouldn't tell the police. But there's only one reason why a man commits sabotage. That's worse than murder.
We fled through 3,000 miles of terror from Los Angeles to New York. Step by step, the whole vast pattern of sabotage became clear to us. We had to find those saboteurs. Well, we found them, and we almost wish we hadn't.
Before they get to us, go out and stop the music and tell them all.
Honey, this is the Sutton Mansion. I'm just a guy from Glendale, California, wanted by the police. They'll grab me as soon as I open my mouth.
What are you going to do? We can't just stand here.
An issue that dogged Hitchcock throughout his career was casting. As we saw earlier, often A-list stars did not want to appear in thrillers. Hitchcock was often stuck with actors he didn't think were appropriate. Here he had his 3 leads handed to him by the producer, and he was not thrilled. This is part of an interview he did with French director Francois Truffaut, and you'll hear the translator during the script.
The main risk with these types of film is the difficulty of getting your central figure played by a man of some importance. It seems to me, in the experience that one has had, that where the player, the leading man, has been a minor figure, the whole film has suffered to me, by reason of the audience not caring enough about the man in trouble. You see what I mean? Let's take all the questions of what, to me, were disappointments in Saboteur. The error of the leading man, played by a competent actor, Robert Cummings, but he belongs to the light comedian area of actor.
Wonderful. I knew right away that you were my new romance.
That his face looks amusing, and when he is in desperate trouble or straits, you cannot show it on the face. Next problem, although I was on loan by Selznick to an independent unit releasing through Universal, they presented me, without asking me, a fait accompli with the leading woman. She was not a Hitchcock leading woman, but I was double-crossed then, you see. So that wasn't very good. I think the major frustration I found on the picture was the casting of the villain.
Where is she?
At that time, there was the element of the war. It was 1941. There were pro-Germans, and I think they used to call them America Firsters. They were kind of American fascists, weren't they, really? I wanted as the villain an actor called Harry Carey. I was very disappointed because to me that is the real counterpoint casting. To take the lovable Western American figure and make him into a villain.
You said you tricked me so well up to then. You played the wife very well, Judy.
So I ended up with a conventional villain.
You mean the grandfather with mustaches?
Otto Kruger.
I'm telling you this for your own benefit, but you have the makings of an outstanding boy.
Saboteur is considered minor Hitchcock, but it has its strengths. It actually has a lot in common with North by Northwest in that the hero travels to prove his innocence across the country. It's still entertaining and did well at the box office, and the climax is a classic. It's a technical and production design showcase with the Statue of Liberty arm being built on a soundstage. That's poor Norman Lloyd hanging by a literal thread. Lloyd worked with Hitchcock a lot, especially as a producer on Alfred Hitchcock Presents. To get that shot, Lloyd was in a black studio on a mount. When cued, the camera was pulled to the top of the soundstage while Lloyd moved around on the mount. When it was inserted into the background plate of the statue, we get the great illusion of falling. Hitchcock decided to try a serial killer story next, but not a typical one. He was able to get Thornton Wilder to work on the screenplay set in Santa Rosa, California. The two worked on the script together and worked very well. The result was the classic Shadow of a Doubt. Once the script was pretty much done, the casting was next. Hitchcock was very interested in William Powell because this role would be very much against type. Powell was eager to do it, but he was under contract to MGM and they were not interested in changing his image. Selznick urged him to hire Joan Fontaine, who was under contract to him, so he would make some extra money by lending her out. Hitchcock, though, turned his eye to her sister, Olivia de Havilland, but she was tied up with another movie and couldn't work with him. Shooting had begun and the opening scene was shot with 3 different sized stand-ins for Charlie, the main character. Selznick suggested another actor he had under contract, Petersburg, Virginia native Joseph Cotten. Hitchcock liked him and Cotten understood the character and was hired. For the other Charlie, Hitchcock took Thornton Wilder's suggestion and hired Teresa Wright, who had been in Our Town on Broadway. She was under contract to Samuel Goldwyn, but he was happy to loan her for the project. Casting was rounded out with Henry Travers and Hume Cronyn, and Wallace Ford and MacDonald Carey as the 2 only semi-incompetent detectives. Hitchcock had the lifelong fear of police, and they were often shown in bad light in his movies. It's the story of Charlie Oakley coming to visit his sister and family. His niece, Charlie Newton, adores him and hopes he'll add some excitement to her life. Unbeknownst to the family, Charlie has murdered several widows for their money and is on the run from police. Young Charlie begins to suspect him, and that puts her life in danger. Here's the trailer for a re-release.
A foul sty. Do you know if you ripped the fronts off houses, you'd find swine?
I don't want you to touch my mother. So go away, I'm warning you. Go away or I'll kill you myself. Your hands. Oh, let me go, Uncle Charlie. Let me go. When you watch the movie, notice the amount of black smoke coming from the train Charlie is coming to town on. Hitchcock had it emitting a lot of smoke to symbolize evil coming to town.
Here's a terrific scene where young Charlie reveals that she knows about Uncle Charlie. Watch how these shots and editing add to the tension along with really good acting all around. And notice how later in the scene the lighting on Uncle Charlie gets a little darker, again symbolizing the evil.
Charlie, you're a pretty understanding sort of girl. You've heard some little things about me. Well, I guess you're a woman of the world enough to overlook them. You're the head of your family, Charlie. Anyone can see that. I'm not so old. I've been chasing around the globe since I was 16. I guess I've done some pretty foolish things. Made some pretty foolish mistakes. Nothing serious, just foolish. Charlie, now. Don't start imagining things.
How could you do such things? You're my uncle, my mother's brother. We thought you were the most wonderful man in the world. Most wonderful and the best.
Charlie, what do you know?
I'm sorry I was so long. We're awful busy. Whose is it? Ain't it beautiful? I'd just die for a ring like that. Yes, sir, for a ring like that, I'd just about die. I love jewelry, real jewelry. You notice I didn't even have to ask if it was real. You can tell. I can.
Bring me another brandy.
Yes, sir.
Sit down. Sit down. You think you know something, don't you? You think you're the clever little girl who knows something. There's so much you don't know. So much. What do you know, really? You're just an ordinary little girl living in an ordinary little town. You wake every morning of your life and you know perfectly well that there's nothing in the world to trouble you. You go through your ordinary little day, and at night you sleep your untroubled, ordinary little sleep filled with peaceful, stupid dreams. And I brought you nightmares. Or did I? Or was it a silly, inexpert little lie? You live in a dream. You're a sleepwalker, blind. How do you know what the world is like? Do you know the world is a foul sty? Do you know if you ripped the fronts off houses, you'd find swine? The world's a hell. What does it matter what happens in it? Wake up, Charlie. Use your wits. Learn something.
You going, Charlie?
Oh, that's great.
Charlie's sister, played by Patricia Collins, was named Emma, probably after Hitchcock's mother of the same name. His mother died in England as the movie was wrapping up. Interestingly, after this, several of his movies have mothers who are rather monstrous. He had a fine relationship with her, so who knows where that came from. I think Shadow of the Doubt is one of Hitchcock's best movies and was one of his personal favorites. I remember when I first saw it, I literally fell out of my chair during the climax. It was so suspenseful. Over at 20th Century Fox, studio head Darryl F. Zanuck was eager to get Hitchcock for a movie or two, but Hitchcock wasn't keen on going there. He was wrapping up Shadow of a Doubt and hadn't had a chance to come up with any projects. But Selznick, who would again get a hefty fee for loaning Hitchcock out, threatened to lay him off for 12 weeks without pay if he didn't go. So he went. He knew Zanuck was an interfering producer as Selznick was, but luckily Zanuck was in Europe helping with the war effort and no one knew when he would be back. So Hitchcock picked the story of survivors of a U-boat attack trying to survive on a lifeboat. Around this time, he had lost his older brother at age 52. This made Hitchcock, who was weighing in at about 300 pounds, decide to cut back on the eating and drinking and lose some weight. He wanted a literary figure to work with him for what was already calling Lifeboat, and he was able to convince John Steinbeck, to write a shorts treatment. Steinbeck had avoided Hollywood but accepted this assignment. He ended up writing a novelette on which the movie ended up being loosely based. Steinbeck's main contribution ended up having his name used on the poster. Hitchcock always wanted Tallulah Bankhead in the lead, even though she had a very uneven movie career. She was best known as a stage actress, but Hitchcock was happy when she accepted the role. The main cast also included Canada Lee, John Hodiak, not well known but he came cheap, William Bendix in a fairly early role, 20th Century Contract player Mary Anderson, and Hume Cronyn, who continued working with Hitch. And Australian-born Walter Slezak got the important role of the Nazi submarine captain after Hitchcock was impressed by his performance in a couple of anti-Nazi films. This was one of Hitchcock's experimental films shot on a soundstage in front of rear projection. It was a very complicated and wet production. Everyone was constantly wet. Bank had gotten pneumonia and Cronyn nearly drowned and was rescued by a studio lifeguard. Tallulah Bankhead was quite unpopular pretty much with everyone during filming. She was a prima donna who loved to name drop and talk on and on. Here's a video that talks about how hard the shoot was and one of Tallulah's peculiar habits during filming. Look out! Stanley!
The production was arduous. People were always being slapped by water, coming down with colds. Tallulah Bankhead twice pneumonia. Hume Cronyn cracking ribs. They felt damp and then very, very hot with all of the lights and scenes where there was blazing sun. And of course, 10 people cramped in a boat with Tallulah, who was off the set and on the set difficult. She was always dropping names, which got everybody very upset. As since the war began, she was on the wagon. You know, she didn't drink, and she was telling everybody about this hundreds of times a day. And amidst the co-stars, nobody else was on her level, so she could lord it over them very, very well.
And there was a famous story about Tallulah Bankhead. When they had the lifeboat up about 12 feet from the ground, well, Tallulah had a rather unfortunate habit of not wearing underwear. And so finally, the assistant director came to my father and said, "Will you talk to Miss Bankhead about please wearing underwear?" And my father said, "Well, I'm not going to do that, and I don't know whether that comes under makeup or hairdressing."
Here's another scene to show how hard the shoot was. The big ship is a model that had to be shot first and then projected behind the boat in a studio tank. The lifeboat is on a device to make it rock around, and then the actors have water and cinders thrown on them.
Relax, Mr. Rittenhouse.
They got her! What's your head?
Too. Fast enough for me.
Well, that settles the score. There comes our ship. She ought to be here in about 20 minutes.
What can we use to signal with?
Wait till she gets a little nearer.
Well, folks, we're in business again. There I go again.
Well, I only hope Miss Spencer hasn't been worrying too much.
Who's Mrs. Spencer?
My wife.
George, you married?
Well, things happen to everybody, you know.
20 minutes? Good heavens, my nails, my hair, my face. Oh, I must look right.
And Lifeboat has maybe his most famous cameo, showing the results of his dieting. In fact, people went to stores looking to buy Reduco. When filming was complete, Hitchcock went to England and left post-production to his wife Alma. Hitchcock insisted on no music except at the very beginning and end. Zanuck was back by now and fiddling around with the editing. Zanuck didn't change the movie much, but got it out before Hitchcock could get back home. In England, Hitchcock directed 2 short propaganda films aimed at the French resistance. Bon Voyage was distributed in 1944 to liberated France and Belgium, but Adventure Malgache ended up being about French traders, so it was never released. Back to Lifeboat one more time. Darryl Zanuck really liked it and thought it had awards potential. He released it in January 1944 while Hitchcock was still in England. Reviews were mixed to say the least. The movie was an allegory about how the world had to fight against the Nazis. The problem was that the Nazi character was the most competent person on the boat. But many reviewers didn't get it, and one even wrote that he gave it 10 days to get out of town. People within 20th Century worried that it had pro-Nazi propaganda value. But with the controversy, it sank at the box office with little support from Zanuck. It did get several Oscar nominations, including a directing one for Hitchcock. This experience also convinced Hitch to move out of 20th Century Fox and back to Selznick Studios. He still owed Selznick 2 movies on his contract and was approved to turn a book about an insane man running an asylum into a movie. Selznick was under psychiatric care and was very interested in the subject. Hitchcock was very happy to work with Ben Hecht. He was a very respected screenwriter who had written such movies as Scarface, Gunga Din, and Nothing Sacred, among many others. Even better, they worked on the script in New York, far from Hollywood and Selznick's meddling. They ended up with Spellbound. Ingrid Bergman was under contract to Selznick too, so this was a natural role for her. It was her and Hitchcock's first of 3 movies in the 1940s. Hitchcock also probably had an unrequited love for her. As the male lead, Selznick picked young Gregory Peck, who had only 2 movies under his belt. One happy happenstance for Hitchcock was that Selznick was tied up with post-production on Since You Went Away, his first movie in 4 years. That pretty much kept him off the Spellbound set. The shooting went pretty smoothly. Peck was a little perturbed that he didn't get much direction from Hitchcock. He was still feeling his way around on a set and would have appreciated some advice. Bergman was professional and got along very well with Hitchcock. One of the more interesting aspects of the movie is a dream sequence devised by none other than Salvador Dali. It was a lot shorter and cheaper than Hitchcock originally planned. Selznick tinkered quite a bit with that scene to Hitchcock's dismay. Dali was also disappointed with the finished sequence. So here it is.
I kept thinking while I was dreaming that all this meant something. That there was some other meaning in it that I ought to find out.
We'll find out.
I can't make out just what sort of a place it was. It seemed to be a gambling house. But there weren't any walls, just a lot of curtains with eyes painted on them. A man was walking around with a large pair of scissors cutting all the drapes in half. And then a girl came in with hardly anything on and started walking around the gambling room kissing everybody. She came to my table first.
Did you recognize this kissing bug?
I'm afraid she looked a little like Constance.
Uh-huh. This is plain, ordinary, wishful dreaming. Go on.
I was sitting there playing cards with a man who had a beard. I was dealing to him, and I turned up the 7 of clubs. He said, "That makes 21. I win." When he turned up his cards, they were blank. Just then, the proprietor came in and accused him of cheating. The proprietor yelled, "This is my place, and if I catch you cheating again, I'll fix you." I'm sorry, the kissing bug.
I'm glad you didn't dream of me as an egg beater, as one of my patients do.
Why, what would that mean?
Never mind.
Well, does it make any sense to you what I've dreamed?
Not yet. You were trying to tell yourself something. What it is, we'll figure out later.
There's a lot more to it.
Go on and try to recall the details.
The more cockeyed, the better for the scientific side of it.
He was leaning over the sloping roof of a high building. It was the man with the beard. And I yelled at him to watch out. Then he went over, slowly, with his feet in the air. And then I saw the proprietor again, the man in the mask. He was hiding behind a tall chimney, and he had a small wheel in his hand. I saw him drop the wheel on the roof. Suddenly, I was running. Then I heard something beating over my head. It was a great pair of wings. The wings chased me and almost caught up with me when I came to the bottom of the hill. I must have escaped. I don't remember.
Don't forget this man. He has plenty to do with the terrifying mystery that causes this glamorous woman to risk her life and reputation in a reckless experiment. A woman who, because of her consuming love for this man, gambles everything to unlock the fearful secret in his heart. What insidious meaning did he read into the markings on a tablecloth? Why, even when he held his sweetheart in his arms, did he gaze in fear at the dark lines of her robe? These are some of the clues in the motion picture which bears Hollywood's most distinguished mark of quality.
I take it this is your first honeymoon?
Yes. I mean, it would be if it were.
We told you not to forget this man. He is Alfred Hitchcock, the famous director, whom you are not likely to forget after you see Spellbound.
Well, Hitchcock went back to England. Selznick took a razor blade to the movie and cut about 20 minutes from it. Along with his tinkering with the dream sequence, Spellbound was another unhappy project for Hitchcock. Hitch then signed a new contract with Selznick for 2 more movies and wanted to work again with screenwriter Ben Hecht. Luckily, Hecht owed Selznick 1 more movie, so they started working on a script very loosely based on a Saturday evening Post serial, The Song of the Dragon. It became one of Hitchcock and Hecht's greatest movies, notorious. But as the script was being written, Selznick was not that enthused with it. Luckily, he was still tied up with the production of Duel in the Sun and didn't pay too much attention at this point. A sticking point in the script was that the heroine was trying to find out what the heroine was trying to find out. She was embedded with Nazis who were plotting something. They came up with uranium in a wine bottle to be used for making an atomic bomb. This was before word had even gotten out about the bomb development, so the FBI apparently wondered where they got that idea. Selznick wasn't impressed with this, but Hitchcock knew that this MacGuffin, which is a plot device that characters care about but the audience doesn't, wasn't that important to the plot and stuck with it. Selznick was never that thrilled with the script, so sold it, Hitchcock, and Ingrid Bergman off to RKO, which was happy to have it. By this time, the atomic bomb had exploded, confirming Hitchcock's MacGuffin. As we've seen before, Hitchcock often had casting problems, but he had a dream cast for Notorious. Grant agreed to take the lead role because it was a different one for him. Bergman, too, liked her role. She was tired of playing good girls, and this gave her a lot more to work with. And Claude Rains was one of Hitchcock's best villains, almost more sympathetic than Grant. The plot basically has Grant pimping Bergman to Rains, who is one of a group of Nazis in Rio de Janeiro plotting to do something with the uranium. He also cast Czechoslovakian-born Leopoldine Konstantin as one of Hitchcock's more monstrous mothers. Filming went smoothly and everyone had a good time. In a bit of movie magic, Hitchcock had to get 5'6" Claude Rains not to be towered over by 5'9" Bergman. Boxes and ramps gave the illusion of them being close to the same height. Hitchcock liked to push various Hollywood envelopes, and he certainly did so here. The production code mandated kisses last not more than 3 seconds. Hitchcock got a nearly 3-minute kiss by great staging. Here it is. Before I show it, a little trivia. The stars never traveled out of Hollywood while making Notorious. Hitchcock sent the great cinematographer Greg Toland to Rio to shoot all the backgrounds needed. So whenever you see the actors seemingly in Rio, they are on a soundstage in front of rear projection. So here's one of the greatest kisses in cinema history, and notice how once the kiss starts, it's shot in one long take, something Hitchcock will do in a couple subsequent movies we'll see.
It's nice out here. Let's not go out for dinner. Let's stay here.
Have to eat.
We can eat here. I'll cook.
Don't you like to cook?
No, I don't like to cook. But I have a chicken in the icebox and you're eating it.
What about all the washing up after it?
We'll eat it with our fingers.
Don't we leave the plates?
Yes. One for you and one for me.
Mind if I had dinner with you tonight?
I'd be delighted. Where are you going?
I'm going to stay in. I have to telephone the hotel, see if there are any messages.
You have to. This is a very strange love affair. Maybe the fact that you don't love me.
Hello? Palace Hotel? Carrying days? It's Tiara Devlin. Any messages for me? When I don't love you, I'll let you know.
You haven't said anything.
Actions speak louder than words. There is? Good. Read it to me, please. Prescott wants me over right away.
Did he say what about?
No.
Maybe it's our assignment.
Probably.
This is probably the most famous shot of the Here's a bit of an explanation of it. Claude Chabrol is a very well-respected French director.
Wonderful visual touch, and he uses it very, very effectively in this film.
De temps en temps, il fait un truc très astucieux que j'ai piqué à mort. Il fait un truc très astucieux, c'est d'utiliser ces objets signes, comme signe d'éléments de l'intrigue, pas de l'intérieur des personnages, de l'intrigue. À partir du moment où le spectateur est habitué à ce que l'objet ait un rôle dans l'intrigue, un rôle souligné dans l'intrigue, il finit par comprendre que parfois, quand ça n'est pas dans l'intrigue, ça doit bien vouloir signifier quelque chose ailleurs.
Within a minute.
Darling, it's not that I don't trust you, but when you're in love at my age, every man who looks at you, woman, is a menace. But forgive me for even talking about it. I'm very contrite.
I love his description of going into for the key to the wine cellar. They built an elaborate wooden crane in order to make the camera come down to that key in her hand. And I asked him why he'd gone to such lengths to do that shot. I mean, it could have been done a number of different ways. You could just show a wide shot and cut in closer and then cut to the hand. I mean, it could have been done very simply other ways, but why did he do it that way? He said, well, that's a cinematic way of saying in this great party, this great hall with a lot of people, a lot of hubbub, the whole thing comes down to a small key in somebody's hand. So it's a way of visually saying that. It's like a paragraph in a story, in one shot. It's a model of filmmaking, storytelling in movies. It's an exceptional shot because it gives you suspense, because the fact that the camera is moving, even though the audience perhaps isn't conscious, they're aware that something's happening. They're being taken somewhere for a purpose.
Notorious, arguably his best movie of the 40s. He had a lot of control over it and had the cast he wanted and the story he wanted to tell. Interestingly, Spellbound, which Hitch did not like that much, did much better at the box office. I'll wrap up Notorious with its trailer so you can see a few more shots from this classic.
I'm sorry to intrude on this tender scene.
I knew her before you did, loved her before you did. I wasn't as lucky as you.
Of
take care of her myself.
No, not that way.
I stood looking at her when she was asleep. I could have...
Quiet, Alex. You are almost as impetuous as before your wedding. You barred me from that episode. Let me arrange this one.
Alicia, what's wrong?
I'm so glad you came.
I had to. I couldn't stand any more waiting and worrying about you. I must not help you like that day. You were sick then.
Yes. Yes, I'm sick.
What is it?
Oh, Dad.
What is it, dear? What's wrong with you?
Me.
It was now 1947, and a couple of things were happening behind the scenes. Hitchcock had just one more movie under his contract with David O. Selznick and was eager to get it going. He was also setting up his own production company, Transatlantic Pictures, so he could have more control over his movies. Selznick was scrambling to come up with a movie and finally settled on The Paradigm Case. It's a courtroom drama about a woman who poisons her husband and her defense lawyer who falls in love with her. Hitchcock agreed, even though he wasn't keen on courtroom dramas. It again had a problematic ending that wouldn't work for the movie, so the ending had to be changed. Once they figured out the script, casting began. Selznick wanted Greta Garbo to come out of retirement to play the murderess. She didn't want to work with Hitchcock and didn't want to play a killer. Hitchcock wanted Ingrid Bergman, but she wasn't interested in working with Selznick again and turned it down. Selznick had casting authority and insisted on some of his contract players, Gregory Peck, Alida Valli, and Louis Jourdan. Hitchcock was not happy. He didn't think Peck could play a British barrister. He thought Valli was not expressive and didn't know English well, and Jourdan was way too glamorous for the role of the rough-hewn manservant, but he was overruled. He was happy with the rest of the cast, including Ann Todd, Charles Coburn, Charles Lawton, and Ethel Barrymore, who got an Oscar nomination out of it. This was not a happy shooting experience for anyone. Selznick decided to show his power by rewriting the script as shooting was occurring. Hitchcock meticulously planned out his movie so he couldn't if he was getting new pages of scripts constantly. The script, as Peck later recounted, got worse and worse as the shooting progressed. The courtroom scenes were often shot with 4 cameras, and it was tough on the cast with changing dialogue. Everyone but Selznick knew this was heading for disaster. In the end, Hitchcock turned in a 3-hour movie which cost $4.25 million, or $50 million today. The same amount as Gone with the Wind. Hitchcock re-edited it and came out with a lifeless movie. Critics blamed Selznick more than Hitchcock, and audiences stayed away. The film ended up grossing $2.19 million, or about $25 million today. Gregory Peck was once asked what movie of his he would like to burn, and guess what his answer was? Let's wrap up this unfortunate production with the trailer.
The Paradigm Case. What manner of woman is Mrs. Paradis? What is the truth about this woman, around whom there raged such a violent storm of conflicting emotions?
I intend that the whole world shall see her as I do, as a noble, self-sacrificing human being.
I know what I'm talking about. What I say is true.
I know her. And I will tell you one thing more. I will tell you about Mrs. Paradine. She's bad, bad to the bone.
I do pity her. Who needs pity more than a woman who's sinned?
But from Mrs. Paradine's own lips came unchecked confessions of infamy.
I ran away with a man. Istanbul, Athens, Cairo.
He was much older, of course. Rich. He took advantage of your youth.
He was married, respected. I took advantage of him.
So by the second half of 1947, Hitchcock was free of Selznick, had his own production company, Transatlantic Pictures, and a distribution deal with Warner Brothers. The only thing he needed was a property to turn into a movie. He had another project for Ingrid Bergman, but she was tied up, so that one had to wait. One idea was for a modern version of Hamlet starring Cary Grant of all people. It's probably just as well that one was never made. So, still wanting to work with Grant, Hitchcock turned to a play first staged in 1929. It was based on the notorious Leopold and Loeb case where the pair murdered someone just for the thrill of it. The play was Rope by Patrick Hamilton. It was something Hitchcock had been interested in for a while, and it's a subject matter that scared off producers, so Hitchcock figured he could get it pretty cheaply. He also thought of shooting it in long takes. That would make it cheaper to produce and had added publicity value. It was also set on a single set, another challenge for him. Hitch had friend Hume Cronin work on the script along with Arthur Lawrence, who got the credit. His dream cast would be Cary Grant as the professor and Farley Granger and Montgomery Clift as the murderers. Underlining everything but never mentioned was that the two main characters were gay lovers, and Granger and Lawrence were lovers while this was going on. But Grant, who was bisexual, and Clift, who was gay, and they were quite afraid to do the movie and refused to do it. It caused a rift with Hitchcock, who said he would never work with Grant again, but we know how that went. Casting settled on James Stewart as the lead. Coming back from the war, he was interested in darker, more complex roles. John Dahl and Farley Granger played the two killers. This was also Hitchcock's first film to be shot in color. The movie took place in real time, which meant the background lighting had to change as it went along, and even the clouds had to move. Added to the shooting in one take, it was very technically challenging, and Hitchcock loved the technical challenge. With hanging sets and props on rubber wheels and a very large Technicolor camera, the actors had a lot to deal with, plus there was the stress of 9-minute takes. Here's the first scene, and one with about the only obvious cut in the movie. That's probably Hitchcock walking down the street in his cameo.
Open it.
Don't.
We've got to see this.
I know. Not just yet. Let's stay this way for a minute.
Well, look, we don't have too much time.
It's the darkness that's got you down. Nobody ever feels really safe in the dark. Nobody who's ever a child, that is. I'll open these, all right? There, that's much better.
And here are a couple of the hidden cuts. See if you can spot them.
Really, you get much too upset much too easily, Philip. We have a very simple excuse. Right here. What are you worrying about, Philip? After all, Mr. Kentley's coming mainly to look at these books. Now, what could be better than to have them laid out neatly on the dining room table where the poor old man can easily get at them? Considerate, aren't we? Most Gone wrong, Brandon? No, Janet just has a talent for being bothersome at times. However, I suppose I'd better... what did you mean? Something gone wrong?
Well, you always plan your party so well, it's odd to have anything go wrong. She seems to be missing David.
As a matter of fact, I'm beginning to miss him myself. Aren't we all?
2 desserts, Mr. Cadell?
One for you, and one for me, my love.
Oh, Mr. C.
Well, the others don't seem to be in the mood for ice cream.
No, well, they could all do with a little cooling off. It's a peculiar party. Not that that surprises me.
Why not?
I could have predicted it this morning. Both of them must have got up out of the wrong side of the bed. They've been in a state all day.
Oh, Mr. Brandon says he's always in a...
And finally, the trailer. It was actually an opening scene that wasn't used in the final film. This is the only time the poor murder victim has any lines.
I just think we ought to wait till after you graduate.
I don't.
It's only a month.
Janet, a month.
Please.
Sorry. I personally consider us engaged as of now. Congratulations.
David, no.
Look, you can say yes in a taxi. I have a 2:30 appointment.
I'm
and
staying right here.
Oh, you'll say yes?
I'll see you tonight at Brandon's party.
Okay. You can say yes there just as well as in a taxi. Goodbye, darling.
Bye.
That's the last time she ever saw him alive. And that's the last time you'll ever see him alive. What happened to David Kentley changed my life completely, and the lives of 7 others. Janet Walker, Henry Kentley, the boy's father, his aunt, Mrs. Atwater, his best friend, Kenneth Lawrence, a housekeeper named Mrs. Wilson, and the 2 who were responsible for everything, Brandon Shaw and Philip Morgan.
Mouse, cat, and mouse. Which is the cat and which is the mouse? Enough of that. Easy, I'll take care of you. Won't. I'd just as soon kill you as kill him.
And they talk about spoilers in trailers today, but this one pretty much gives away the whole movie. Hitchcock later admitted this was probably a stunt and not that cinematic. It was more of a photograph of a stage play. But the gay undertone proved to be a problem for Warner Brothers, and they didn't help much with the publicity or bookings. It did just okay at the box office, but has grown in stature over the years. I'd like to wrap up the 1940s on an up note, but unfortunately Hitch's final film was probably his worst. It's hard to know why he picked this to make, other than an opportunity to film it back in England. Set in Australia, it had a very miscast Joseph Cotten playing an Irishman, despite Cotten being unable to do an Irish accent. Hitchcock wanted to work with Ingrid Bergman again, and he became very overconfident on this picture. His fame went to his head a bit. It was a costume drama, not his strong suit. It had no suspense and was 2 hours of talk, talk, talk. Hitchcock had a crush on Bergman and wanted to work with her again. He also decided to do very long takes once again, which he really hated for most of the shooting. It sounds like a nightmarish shoot with cameras and props moving constantly, cables on the floor, and chalk marks so the cast knew where to move. The Technicolor camera was huge. Joseph Cotten called it the monster, so it was a real challenge. Here's 2 parts of a 5-minute long take that shows a bit of the challenge. In the beginning, watch the chair at the head of the table as the camera approaches, and you'll see it mysteriously moves as stagehands are moving it and the table out of the way. Then as the group comes back to the dining room, watch the candles on the table wobble as the table is moved back into place.
Doorbell wouldn't ring, so I had to come round this way. Very strange thing.
Glad to see you. We'll go through the dining room if you don't mind.
Good looking Cully there.
Quite a party you're having tonight, Mr. Flesky.
Winter.
Yes.
Mrs. Flesky. Should know better.
Good evening.
Watch that chair there.
May I introduce the Reverend Mr. Smiley, Mr. Rigg, our resident engineer.
Mrs. Smiley bid me tell you how distressed she was to be unable to accept your kind invitation. She isn't very well, you know, and Mrs. Rigg most generously offered to sit with her for the evening.
That's right. My wife is most disappointed. I think you know, Mr. Plasky, that Mrs. Rigg is very partial to a life of gaiety.
Follow me, gentlemen.
I trust your wife's indisposition is serious.
No, indeed, sir, no. Mrs. Smiley is not very strong, but she has remarkable powers of recuperation. I find it difficult to express, Mr. Flosky, the deep appreciation which the Church feels at your gift of the baptismal font. Be perfectly sure that the Lord will bless the gift.
Mr. Corrigan, the Attorney General, Mr. Adair.
Honor. How do you do?
I had the honor to meet your father once when I was on circuit. He wouldn't remember me.
Miss Billy.
A fellow at the time.
Oh, I'm sure he'd remember you.
Was I right?
Not a blasted one. Where is she?
I'll go off and see.
Don't let her come down.
I won't. You'd better start dinner, sir.
You're a father yourself, perhaps?
No.
Bring your wine in with you. Dinner's ready. We may as well get it over, Mr. Adair.
Charming fellow, the governor. I quite an interesting chap.
Follow me, gentlemen.
I told him a very funny story about a fellow.
How is our patient? I hope she's sleeping better.
Well enough.
Oh, great sense of humor. Good soldier.
My wife sends her apologies. Apologies seem to be in the air tonight. You'll find your place,
There's
cards.
the wobbling candles. Here's the trailer so you can have one last chance to see Ingrid Bergman.
Under Capricorn, starring Ingrid Bergman, Joseph Cotten, Michael Wilding, Margaret Leighton.
I hope you haven't been giving too much thought to what I said about Miss Day and her ladyship in her bedroom. I'm sure it wasn't her fault, but she wasn't what you call responsible at the time. I know she wasn't, because she had half her clothes off and didn't seem to notice.
I wouldn't go in there, Sam. I tell you she's had a triumph. We mustn't spoil it. Well, ice. I'm not good enough to stand the fact my wife when she's with the quality.
Don't be ridiculous, Sam. You aren't even dressed for a ball.
Look again. Sir Richard, may I present my husband? You're talking about horses. I was telling His Excellency.
But I was brought up in a stable. I heard you. My money's as good as the next man's. The compliments of Mr. Samson Plusky, Esquire. It'll pay for my wife's supper.
Under Capricorn, the story of a strange and fascinating woman and the two men in her life.
You bloody murdering sex!
Bergman, beautiful, tortured.
What's the matter? What is it?
You said this woman had to kill me.
Here's a poster that makes it look like a horror movie, but nothing helped. One thing that definitely didn't help was Bergman running off with Italian director Roberto Rossellini. This caused a big scandal in America, so she couldn't do publicity for the movie, and the audience didn't want to see her in one. The movie was ripped apart critically, repossessed by the bank, and caused Hitchcock's Transatlantic Pictures to cease to exist. So the 40s was an interesting decade for Alfred Hitchcock. It brought him to America, where he made many classics, one unlikely comedy, and a few lesser movies. But it set the stage for the next decade, his greatest. Thanks to most of these movies, he will always be known as the master of suspense. And thank you very much for joining me for a look at Hitchcock in the 40s.